programs are busy. We have to be on time, so we will start while the room is probably slowly filling up as we go along. So welcome to this strategic dialogue on connecting the dots from source to sea. My name is Torkild Clausen. I'm Danish, neighboring country, chairing the action platform for source to sea management that is hosting this session. We are, in the last few years, and the last time when we actually met face to face, which was 3 years ago, long ago, right? We actually had an ocean day at the World Water Week. That was when the ocean agenda started rising in the minds of the freshwater people. So today is also an ocean day. Here we have a number of sessions talking about source to sea and why the ocean is so important. And therefore we are really happy to see you here for this dialogue, as we call it, connecting the dots. This session has been organized and convened not... I have to put it closer. Yes. Okay, could you hear it in the beginning? In the back? Okay, yeah. By a number of co-conveners that we are really thankful to. It's Ramsar, and Ramsar with Jerka will run the show after a bit. It's IUCN, both the ocean part and the Vietnam part of IUCN. It's the French Water Partnership. It's the Ocean Sewage Alliance, and it's Deltares. So we are very grateful to all these partners to have come forward and organize this thing. And you will hear from them exciting cases and stories about source to sea. You will followed by a panel discussion or a strategic dialogue. So this is what we're here for. And we're also trying, Jose, is that not true? We're trying to involve you in that dialogue. So it's not just going to be a panel, but it's a panel with you in the room. So I think that one of the things that we find for this Ocean Day is that it falls between two very notable global events. The UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon last June, and the UN Water Conference next year in New York in March. These are setting the scene for the global agenda for water management. And what we see now is that marine people are coming to freshwater meetings, are talking about source to sea, and vice versa. We saw at the UN Ocean Conference that we are opening up to one another. We're talking to each other much more. But that's not enough. We have to also make a real impact. And therefore, what comes out of this week here in Stockholm is also going to shape what we can do to the, at the UN Ocean Conference. And so I'm very glad that at this meeting, our keynote speaker, Henk is from the Netherlands, right? Which is near the sea. And the other host is from Tajikistan, which is very much the source. And Henk, I think that you call the Netherlands Tajikistan collaboration partnership from source to sea, is it not? So I think we have an exciting afternoon ahead of us, and the one who's going to make it happen is Jerka Tamelanda from Ramsar. So, Jerka, over to you.
Great. Thanks. I have this. Thank you so much, Torkild, for those opening words. Also on my behalf, a warm welcome to all of you here in Stockholm and to participants around the world who are joining us online. My name is Jerka Tamelanda. I'm the Director of Science and Policy at the Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands, so a intergovernmental instrument that very much connects land and ocean source to the sea. I'll be moderating this strategic dialogue session today. In fact, I'm a relative newcomer to the World Water Week. In some ways, I'm exactly one of those marine people attending freshwater meetings that Torkild referred to. Not so new to Stockholm, and I'm very, very happy to be back here again. In fact, I grew up just over there in southern Finland in the archipelago, and I guess as a personal reflection, I have to say that growing up by and on and in the Baltic Sea is probably one of the best way to make you appreciate the importance of source-to-sea connections and the importance of a source-to-sea approach. You have seen the sea fundamentally change as a result of actions on land, and at the same time we're also seeing some glimmers of hope. We see change in the right direction. Point source pollution is addressed in many cases quite successfully. Watershed management is improving, and so we have a long way to go. It shows that things can be done, and it shows that an approach of this kind can probably accelerate that change further and be applied more broadly. So in this session we want to explore those ideas. How can we learn from each other about source-to-sea management? How can we learn from practical experiences of people who are actually doing the doing and not just the talking? How can it foster actions towards enhancing delivery on the 2030 agenda across the agenda? And how do we really accelerate and step up those actions? We'll hear from experts, as I mentioned before. We'll hear about their ongoing work, and we'll have a panel discussion in which we hope, among panel members, but also in which we hope we can engage the audience here in Stockholm. We hope we can get some questions also from online attendees. So that's a very, very brief overview of what you have in front of you. Before we get into that, I'm very happy to be able to introduce our keynote speaker to set the scene for this session. I think Torkild already mentioned him. Henk Ovink needs very little introduction. He's the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs for the Government of the Netherlands. He's a tireless advocate of water awareness globally. He's building collaboration and momentum among governments, multilateral entities, civil society, youth, and together with Sultan Ramsar of Tajikistan, he's of course a Sherpa for the UN Water Conference. So great to have you here as a speaker, Henk. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being an inspiration to so many people. The floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, and we have to give you one of these. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Source to sea, yeah? So the Netherlands and Tajikistan, you said it, Torkild, are already source to sea partners. The highest point of the Netherlands is the lowest point of Tajikistan. And then they only go up 7,500 meters. I swam in Aral Sea, which is the Aral Lake, which is 3,500 meters high. So Torkild, I know you swim every day, but not as high. The water was also a little bit more pristine than the place where you swim. So Tajikistan and the Netherlands, as co-host of next year's UN 2023 conference, see ourselves as partners in source to sea, but not as a metaphor, because that would be very cheap. Source to sea, and then we get on to our business. No, but because it's real. And just another metaphor, and then I try to get to business. You said connecting the dots. Let's change it to connecting the drops now, because we're in a water space. We have to forget about dots, but find a way to connect drops. It's going to be helpful, I guess. I have a challenge. Source to sea as a partnership, and thanks to SIWI, the government of Sweden, UNDP, and the government of Netherlands, and all our partners, came from, you could say, an under-the-table initiative to something to provoke the existing conversations in silos, to provoke a debate among politicians, scientists, experts, advocates, that systems approach is something you should not be afraid of. Because source to sea addresses that there are interlinkages across, shows that those interlinkages matter, because everything is connected. So what you put in one place, in a river basin, in an aquifer, in a lake, ends up in another place. And this can be something that we can call pollution, but can also be something completely different. A development of a city or a forest. Reforestation has an immediate impact on our water system all the way to our sea and back again, because it's the water that we see, as well as the theme of this conference, the water that we don't see, which is in our ground, but also in the air. And especially the winner of this year's Stockholm World Water Prize has made clear also this morning that this source to sea approach is what we see and what we don't see. It's a systems approach. Now, we don't like systems approaches in the world because we say they're too complex. Simplify, Henk, because otherwise you will never land successfully in next year's conference. But I say embrace that complexity. Embrace the complexity that source to sea brings, because it provides us with opportunities that on pathways and commitments and interventions that really make a difference. If we continue to single focus our way towards the future, we'll end up more vulnerable than we were ever before. And the past proves that. Our single focused responses to the challenges we faced end up where we are now, that 99% of global investments increase climate change and, second, destroy our environment, our systems, our source to sea capacity, and therefore make us more vulnerable. And in the 1%, we celebrate, also here in Stockholm, and think that we have salvation, but we're nowhere close. And the last decades has shown that scaling that 1% is impossible. So to get to an approach that provokes the systems, and that is exactly what the UN 2023 conference will be about, provoke the existing with opportunities and commitments and alternatives, the source to sea approach provides us with those pathways. That will not be easy, but I can assure you three things. One, in the lead up to the conference, the Netherlands and Tajikistan promised to help support a safe space for exploring that provocation with you and by you, to make sure that is what lands on the table next year when we talk about commitments, that those commitments really show that there is an alternative of the existing, that the systems approach really matter, that connecting social, environmental, cultural, economic, financial approaches really add value across every sustainable development goal, and that we don't have to be afraid of that complexity, because it actually empowers all, the most vulnerable first, the youth, the women and children from across the world, the indigenous that live in these environments from source to sea. Second, we will make sure the conference itself is that platform where the safe space turns into a stage like a megaphone, that we call to the world that say, hey, this is an opportunity. And in a way, I can be happy that water is not something that is organized at the UN, that there is nothing to agree upon, that there is no negotiation, because it gives us the opportunity to actually go a little bit further. What happens in a negotiation, you always end up somewhere in the middle. You know this. You go into negotiation, you think, oh, this is what I want to get out of it. And then you enter the room and somebody else also wants to get out of it. And then you come home and your little daughter says to you, hey, daddy or mommy, what did you do? I negotiated. So what did you get? 80%. If you're lucky, 50% normally. And then she will say to you, oh, you just lost 50. But a partnership does something different. A collaboration on a systems approach, bringing in all voices from all aspects of all drops in this system, brings a surprise. Because you have to bring something to a conversation, not to get something out. And if you ensure that there is this table where we help inspire and provoke that collaboration, bringing that will add value across every SDG. And before you know it, you come home with a surprise, something you did not expect, but something that adds value across the system we call source to sea. That's the conference. And then after the conference, those commitments brought together in this water action agenda will have support. So this goes beyond the normal system we see in voluntary national review, supported by the high-level political forum in UNDESA, where every member state actually presents their own commitments. But these partnerships don't fit such a system. So we have to tailor-made the support mechanisms coming out of those commitments, what they need. And the Source2Sea platform in itself is such a support mechanism. If we can use, in the best way of meaning of that word, the Source2Sea approach and platform as a way to support those initiatives that drive change, bring partnerships, build inclusive capacity across our institutions, our communities, our individuals, that show that there are projects that are the alternative to what we want to see, then that is exactly the platform that we need to not only implement those commitments, but also replicate and scale them, so the conference itself, next to being a megaphone, also becomes a way to spread and implement the things that work across the world, in your communities and the ones that are your neighbors and across the world. And then perhaps because of that, because we present the world with an alternative that goes beyond what we agreed upon, that actually inspires others to join, that 1% of global investments can turn into 2, 4, 16 and a majority, because the alternative is more compelling, more inspiring, and more sustainable than the existing mechanisms that we have. We'll see, Source2Sea, if we can make that a reality. Yes, I don't know what yellow means, but it's probably I have to stop. Yeah, okay, soon. Yellow means soon, okay. Well, this is good, because this is what I wanted to say. The systems approach that Source2Sea provides us for policy, practices, investment, research, capacity, has to land in coalitions. Coalitions of the willing to provoke the coalitions of the unwilling, to escape the existing lock-in that we find in our political and often geopolitical systems, or our very small-scale systems on the ground in our communities, where public and public and public and private and private and public partnerships do not work, because vested interest and past practices are in their way. We have to overcome that, and that alternative has to inspire us, has to aspire us, be ambitious to ensure that we deliver. And there's a thing, a conference don't change the world. You know, I said this before this week. This is my first UN conference I have the honor to lead together with Tajikistan. In my lifetime will be the last. I don't intend to become 110. That means it's once or no, now or never. April 1 cannot be our Fool's Day. If we look in the mirror April 1 next year after the conference, we should be able to look ourselves in the eye and take pride of what we tried, pride of what we achieved, and pride of what we will deliver post the conference. And I'm pretty sure with the partnership we have here and with you in the room, we can. Best of success. And let us hear from you. We need to know we are who we are, simple human beings. The only thing we can do is because we know. If we don't know, we can't act upon that. October 24 is the preparatory meeting in New York for stakeholders to make member states ready for October 25, where they will decide upon the themes of the conference for next year and the organizational matters. Let your voice be heard prior to October 24 by addressing us and your partners, and be there on October 24 or your partners to make sure that we know what you want to get out of this conference, so that we know what we have to do and what the objective is that is coming from the world. If we don't hear from you, we don't know. So be vocal and active and be a partner, and we will try to provide the safe space where that is possible. Best of success.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Henk, for those words. Thanks for laying out a vision for the Water Conference, a conference that can really catalyze change, presenting an alternative, charting a new way forward, and thanks also for highlighting that we shouldn't be too afraid of complexity. Yes, it is complex. If we don't acknowledge that and tackle that, we're not really going to make much of a difference. Trying the same thing over and over again with moderate success, as we may have done for a long time, should give us food for thought, and that's a very helpful reminder. At this point in time, we should move forward towards the next segment of this session, which is a panel discussion. And I would like to introduce our panelists here today who will help us connect the drops. Thank you, Henk, for that. They are practitioners in diverse fields, diverse settings, who can share experiences from their work in how they have promoted source to sea approaches, how they have experienced successes and challenges, and their views on how we can tackle this issue more and more assertively going forward. So without further ado, Andrea Ferret is a program officer at the French Water Partnership, Chris Clapp, the executive director of the Ocean Sewage Alliance, Mark Weber, advisor ecology and water quality at Deltares. And then joining us online, we have Lynn Sorrentino, program officer in the IUCN Ocean Team, and Hien Bui Thitu, Marine and Coastal Resource Program Coordinator at IUCN Vietnam. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Lynn and Hien. I hope and believe that you're with us online. I can't see you, but I know that you're out there. So we'll bring you into the proceedings in a moment. We'll give each panelist 5 minutes to talk about their experiences in source-to-sea management, perspectives, practical cases, and so on. And after that, we'll go into a discussion among the panelists, after which I'll open it up to questions from the floor. So take your time to listen to the panelists, but also give some thought to what the topics are that you would like to raise within this session, and hopefully we'll get around to that in due time. With that, yes, maybe a last point to say, those of you following online, we do have someone monitoring the chat. Please do type your chat functions, and as possible, we'll try to pick up on that bit as well. So, without any further ado, the first speaker today will be Lynn Sorrentino. So if we can have the slide on screen, and we can see Lynn already there. So thank you very much. The floor is yours, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Jörger. Thank you, Torkel and Henk, for the introductory words. I do have a set of slides that I'll be sharing, and I hope that they will be online soon. There, maybe. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction. IUCN, for those of you who are not aware, is a global union organization made up of 18,000 scientists, 6 commissions, environmental law, climate soon, and other commissions on education and things. The scope of IUCN is global, and our work consists of projects and efforts to restore and preserve nature and rebuild what's been happening in the world over the last several decades across 160 countries. And our partnerships are with national governments, subnational governments, NGOs, and civil society, as well as UN organizations and others. So it's such a pleasure to be here today. And I am going to give a short perspective on source to sea and the SDGs. Next slide, please. So source to sea highlights the upstream and downstream linkages between land, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems. And what Henk mentioned about the complexity of systems thinking and looking at these systems is absolutely necessary for source to sea to be effective. It fosters, this approach fosters participation and collaboration between stakeholders at the top in Tajikistan, all the way down to the bottom in the Netherlands and beyond. It is meant to prioritize actions that balance the system out, the trade-offs and the benefits from source to sea. It's valuable as well in addressing climate and biodiversity issues. Next slide, please. So linking source to sea to the SDGs, there are many links in terms of developments upstream, along rivers, these may cause what Hank mentioned as well, negative effects, and you can see this differently as a development or as pollution. But the negative effects on the ecosystems downstream in the coastal and marine areas impact the well-being of these ecosystems. And this ecosystem well-being view needs an understanding of the systemic linkages between the segments along the whole continuum. The relationships between upstream pressures and downstream efforts highlight the importance of integrating efforts and understanding the cross-disciplinary connections to achieve, for example, SDG 6 on freshwater, SDG 14 on oceans, but also there are linkages to SDG 2 related to populations and food for populations. The requirement of fresh water for food links to SDG 2. SDG 6, of course, is related to irrigation when you're talking about farming. The availability of fresh water depends on healthy ecosystems. The wetlands that Jurka represents through Ramsar are the kidneys of the world in terms of how they process water to keep it clean. The linkages to SDG 14 and 15 on healthy ecosystems are clearly shown through an S2S source to sea approach. And finally, in terms of linking S2S to the SDGs, we can also look at the international level of governance and partnerships. And it's super important to think about any sort of S2S project with its partnerships and how it can help with transboundary water cooperation and the legal frameworks for marine protection, et cetera, linking as well agriculture and other things. So the links are clear throughout all of the SDGs. And I think I can go to the next slide, please. Just to give you a brief overview of IUCN's Nature 2030 program, this emphasizes all of our work globally. So we seek to contribute to the delivery of SDGs, and we look at the long-term view to ensure alignment with the Agenda 2030. In terms of our pathways to the change, this is what you're seeing on the screen. We aim to recognize that people and planet face unprecedented changes and how to address them, retain the world's biodiversity, restore species and ecosystems, and resource the movement in terms of mobilizing investment and reconnecting people to nature. So again, almost all of our projects that we work on have some source to sea component at one level or another, whether it's water program work or ocean program work or our work in the regions or in the countries. I think this is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions in the chat and discuss a little bit more about how all of this links together and talk about the work of IUCN. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lynn, and actually we'll have time to delve into this in a bit more detail in a moment. I wanted to ask an immediate follow-up question to you. You mentioned IUCN, IUCN's program, and you also mentioned the bits that form IUCN, the membership, the commissions, the secretariat. And so my question is, how do you set source to sea management within a truly union-wide approach to SDG delivery? How do you make, the strength of the full breadth of IUCN take this message up and carry it forward?
That's a good question, Jurka. Thank you. I think the way we do it is through communication. We work across the units, across the commissions, with our members, with our scientists that make up the union. And it's really about, for projects especially that are around water or on the ocean, there's always a discussion of how does this link to the other things happening in that country or in that region. So it's really about communication and bringing in people that are the specialists that need to be part of the programs as we develop new programs and projects. And as we're going through a project, a lot of the work that IUCN focuses on in terms of its monitoring and evaluation include a look at the impacts and where this may have negative impacts or positive impacts. So again, it's really related to how we work collaboratively and how we communicate so that we hopefully, can share information and transfer knowledge across our work and improve the things we do in the future, for example.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn, and stay online, please, for discussion later. Without any further wait, let's ask the next presenter to take the lectern, perhaps Andrea Ferret with the French Water Partnership. The floor is yours, and here you can actually see your slides when you present, so we can swap places.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Andrea Ferret, and I work at the French Water Partnership on biodiversity issues and nature-based solutions. So this is... Yes, and I'm here to present to you our study on source-to-sea coherence on the Rhone River Basin. Very quickly about the Rhone, it's one of the most powerful and highly artificialized water in France, so that means it's very dangerous in terms of flood risks. It flows from Switzerland down to Camargue, which is the delta where it flows into the Mediterranean Sea. And it's highly vulnerable to climate change. So it also means it has great potential for integrated adaptation using the source-to-sea approach. And we can also sense that SDGs are a big thing because water governance in the Rhone also ties to many other SDG points. So obviously SDG 6, but also energy, because there are a few hydropower dams along the Rhone. Safe cities, climate change, life on water, and life on land. And so the study we are conducting looks at 3 case studies that you can see circled in red. The first, almost at the source, looks at sediment management between Switzerland and France. The second, right at the middle of the river around the Montélimar city, looks at flood risk management, because as you know, flood risks need to be managed from source to sea, as they can impact different regions of the same river. And the third case study looks at the delta in Camargue, which is a hotspot for biodiversity, but also hosts many sometimes conflicting uses that are culturally and economically important, such as rice culture, for example, which suffers from seawater intrusion on top of other many things. So you can see that there is high economic stakes, and that the SDGs are very present, and a whole host of SDGs are present. Also a little point about how water management works in France. Using the framework, the Water Framework Directive of the EU, water is managed at the basin level by the French water agencies. So it's already implementing something somewhat of a source-to-sea approach. But I wanted here to focus on the Rhone plan, Plan Rhone, which is quite transparent as in terms of translation, which is 20 years sustainable development and sustainable economic development that has been designed in 2004, so it's coming up to an end very, very soon. It's a program that's been that's been using stakeholder participation since its very beginning, and we know that stakeholders' participation across the board is really important for source-to-sea management, because it has to be transversal, right? So taking into account a variety of users, a variety of interests in order to be sustainable. So it covers many water uses, such as waterway transportation, flood risks, historical sites renovation, ecosystem preservation, a whole host of uses that need to be managed. And it's implementing both a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, because they have 2 commissions, and the steering committee is very top-down, so it's maybe national institutions, big corporations, and the reporting committee is bottom-up, with local governments, small associations, users representatives, etc. And what they're doing is that they are funding and labeling projects that are going in the direction of the SDGs, right? And also trying to improve public understanding of policies, which is very important, because sometimes in projects, the problem is not that the project is bad, but it is that it's perceived as bad, or perceived as too costly, or it changes the uses too much. And so communication with the greater public is really important. And as you can see on this picture, which is the bridge in Avignon on the Rhône River Basin. The bridge is incomplete, but it's a step in the right direction. And what that means is basically everyone we talk to in the case studies tell us this is not great, this is not optimal, this is not efficient enough. And what you need to know is that us French people love complaining. So it means if I had to give 3 takeaways from the studies that is not yet finished, but if I had to give takeaways, recommendations for anyone who wants to implement a source to sea approach at their level, it would be first have something that is adaptive and flexible, which is the case with the Rhône plan, which is revised every 5 years, which means you can integrate new actors if someone is becoming more important in the river basin than they were 5 years ago, and you need to bring them in and around the table. That means you can do that. So you need to be adaptive. Also, you have to know that the Rhône plan is part of a greater landscape of huge multiple institutions operating at different levels, really heavy administrative costs and sometimes very long waiting times. And what that does, it means that the projects are sometimes very hard to implement. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know who should be your point of contact in the institutions you want to work with. So that's like one of the challenges that we find in the Rhône water management. And the last point is that when there is a multiplicity of actors doing the same thing, sometimes on the same territory, there might be redundancy or even policy gaps. So that's something to look for. So if you had to take 3 takeaways from this presentation, is that the Rhône River Basin is managed from source to sea. And what we can learn from that is that you have to be flexible and adaptive. You have to look to avoid redundancy and policy gaps. And you have to bring everyone around the table for it to last a long time. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions if you have any during the session or afterwards.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea. And indeed, the Rhône panel is an excellent example, going truly from the source to the sea, and a very interesting example of an adaptive approach, an adaptive instrument where you acknowledge that the situation requires that you don't always stick to your guns, but that you accommodate and move forward. I did have a follow-up question straight away, which was on how you have approached ecosystem protection and restoration within this work, and have you used that in the Rhône Basin to really support delivery on SDG targets?
NBS is really interesting looking at source to sea, because most of the time the recommendations you give to people when they want to do NBS is collaboration, transparency, obviously taking into account complex ecosystems and being adaptive, which is very, very similar to what you tell people who want to do source to sea. So the source to sea model is really adapted to talking about NBS and sort of bringing people on board. And we see that in the Delta case study in Camargue, which is a regional park for biodiversity, which has a special contract. It's a special institution to manage the delta, because it's been over decades highly artificialized. So the whole hydrology of the delta is artificialized for rice culture, cattle raising, touristic uses. And what we're seeing now is that institutions are buying up properties or acquiring properties on the waterfront, and they're sort of letting the levee die naturally, sort of giving it back to the sea. And so that will change the landscape hugely. And that's not always well understood by the population who wants to keep going to the beach like they used to since like life memory. But this is a kind of example of nature-based solutions being implemented because we have this source to sea management.
Excellent, thank you. And you actually see that the ownership across different sectors of this approach and how it's being adopted more broadly. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. Our next panelist then, again online, Hien. Hien, great to have you here with us. We obviously have worked together rather many years ago by now, but I think this is a topic that you've spent a lot of effort on in Vietnam, and you personally look forward to hearing from you on pollution experiences in the Vuja-Tubon River Basin. The floor is yours.
Yeah, many thanks, Jacob, and great to see many friend faces again. And SIWI and IUCN with support from GIZ working together in city of Hội An, central Vietnam, to implement the salt to sea approach and address the plastic pollution challenge affecting these beautiful coastal cities. Since 2013, we start our study with stakeholders in Vuja-Tubon River Basins, one of the 9 biggest basins in Vietnam, which is located in central areas. This is under the Mangrove for the Future initiative. When we observe this, the issue of the heavily coastal erosion in Hội An. At this time, we use the name is RIC rather than salt to sea. In 2016, we support the establishment of the Joint Coordination Committee from 2 provinces of the basin. And this committee is still working until now. And the main focus is very much on the water resource management and some linked to hydropowers. In 2017 and 18, we worked together with the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management in Sweden to address some issue with the salt to sea approach, which focus on hydropowers and water management. Since 2019, we together with SIWI, we are tackling marine plastic pollution from salt to sea with pilot site in Vuja-Tubon. And then in 2021, we focus in Hội An city only. It is one city belong to the river basins. Why we choose plastic pollution? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As you can see, that is the photos of the overload capacity of open landfills in Hội An city. And then you can see the riverside and the coastal area. It turned to become a rubbish bins of the city. So it's a very sad photo. Next slide, please. And here is some of the information about plastic leak in the Vuja-Tubon in the river basin that we did in 2019, our research. And in the urban centers, the highest waste generations is also have the highest collection rate. Why in the low density settlement and rural area with the lower waste generation, lower collection rate, but the highest leakage of the plastic waste. And in the coastal and the touristic area, higher rates of the direct leakage and the higher sensitivity to the impact. And we can see obviously that with the salt to sea approach, we can see the geographical area impacted to the from salt to sea, from river to the marine area. Next slide, please. So what is our recommendation? With the existing salt to sea management experience in Vuja-Tubon, including water resource, hydropower, agriculture, flood, etc., the 2 locality of the Vuja-Tubon River Basin incorporated the pollution flow into the salt to sea management approach. So that is what we recommended to the Vuja-Tubon, and they are interested on that. As plastic pollution is the top local priorities. So now is the right time to turn local attention to this management approach. The rollout is recent and it is the pilot phase, so it will take some time. And we need a group of solutions from perfecting law and policies, and we need to improve it. Applying salt to sea approach, practicing circular economies, business and private sectors involvement, use extended producer responsibilities as a tools, raising awareness, strengthening finance and human resource, and political will is very important. However, one more slide to highlight what is the need. And then I would like to raise the role of the informal sector. As informal sector have both positive and negative impact, but at the moment they play an important role in collecting and recycling waste as the largest contributor toward to recycling and reuse the waste in the entire countries. You can imagine in Hội An City, with a total waste about 80 to 100 tons a day, and the informal sector can collect about 10% of this. So they are really a great worker for the moment in the country, and we should work hard to involve them and integrate them in the formal systems. Next, please. Well, I think my presentation is finished, and this experience I want to share with you that we need healthy freshwater ecosystem to have healthy oceans. I'm also the marine person, and then I'm joining the freshwater meeting today. And it's end my presentation. Thank you for any questions.
Question, waste management. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I just hear your voice now, not before.
Okay, sorry, let me start over. So you mentioned pollution flow as an important consideration in source to sea management. And waste management is of course an end of the pipe solution. How could or how has the source to sea approach helped you finding solutions in production and consumption or further upstream aspects of plastic waste effort?
Well, as I mentioned, the soft to sea is quite new in Vietnam. Even we start to work in 2013 with the name Rig to Rib. But definitely soft to sea approaches which cover all component, high guide upstream to downstream of the process and address the source of the pie. And in plastic waste management, we could analyze the waste stream and understand the high leakage in both geographical area from the remote rural area, which already shared in my presentations, or in the waste stream, for example, what is the worst? I mean, consumption or collection or treatment. So we have to find out what is issue, then we can address this right in the beginning. And it is much more cost benefit when address the salt or upstream issue rather than the end of the pipe or the downstream actions. For example, that we often receive a request of doing the beach cleanup, and then it costs more, and then it's not effective. However, I understand that the beach cleanup could raise awareness, but it's not solve the problems, and it's not solve the problem with the plastic pollution. And this is the reason why salt to sea had been introduced in Vietnam in the Vusatubo, and it changed the way of thinking of these decision makers.
Thank you. Thanks much for that additional information here. And again, I'd like to move forward with our next panelist here on site, Chris Clapp of the Ocean Sewage Alliance, and you have full control over that yourself.
Thank you, Jukka. The Ocean Sewage Alliance is a partnership-driven organization that looks to address the roughly 85% of the world's sewage that enters the world's oceans untreated or not treated to a high enough degree. We'd like to create a space where people could share information, give and receive information, find expertise that they need so that they could empower a local champion to take on the systemic change that needs to occur in that locality. As it was said earlier, it's very complicated. You're going to need science, technology, partnerships, outreach, finance, policies, and no one person can do that alone, and no one set of groups can do that alone without a local champion to wake up every day and say, what am I going to do today to move the needle a little bit further towards implementation on reducing the amount of sewage going into my local waters? Now, when some people think of sewage pollution, the first thing that might come to mind is a big outfall pipe or something like this. But the fact is that much more of the sewage that goes into our coastal waters, lakes, streams, rivers, comes through the ground and is very much unseen. So while this picture here is something that is also unseen because it's far out in the ocean, don't have to worry about it, do we, right? It's also something that is a little bit more seen and a little bit easier to address than the decentralized nature of the majority of the world's wastewater management. And the impacts of this are real. So here you see what a healthy coral reef should look like, and what an impacted coral reef actually looks like. And in the coral community, it's a combination of the viruses and pathogens that are in the water directly impacting the reefs themselves and the holobonts and the relationships on the reefs, but it's also the eutrophication causing algal growth that ultimately smothers the reefs. Now, it's not just coral reefs. If you live away from the equator and you live in more temperate regions, you will likely see situations like this. And these are all pictures taken within a few miles of my home on Long Island, New York. So you have eutrophication driven by nitrogen pollution, which then causes harmful algal blooms. The harmful algal blooms die at night and soak up all the oxygen in the water, drive down the pH in the water. The shellfish can't create a shell. You see these negative feedback that happens. The salt marshes that are there to be the liver of the system ultimately can't handle the amount of nutrients that they get and can't stand up to the wave energy, which we rely upon them to protect our coasts. Fish kills are a common problem because some of these harmful algal blooms, like I said, decrease oxygen in the water, but some of them also create toxins that are directly harmful to fish. They're harmful to shellfish, and some of them are actually directly harmful to people. And seagrass beds, another one, a great system for sequestering carbon, creating nurseries for coastal fisheries and offshore fisheries, both commercial and recreational fisheries. So you can see how these systems are all integrated. It's our groundwater systems, our drinking water systems. As we see here, where I come from, we are a groundwater fed system. As far as our drinking water, we're wholly reliant upon the groundwater beneath our feet for all of the water, and there is no plan B for that. But there's hope, right? Because like I said, you get a great partnership together. They provide support for a local leader, and what you could do is put together a plan. Right, so what you see here is a small island, roughly 2,500 homes, but it's sort of a microcosm of many other places in the world. This could be anywhere. And on the left-hand side, you see the current state. And the only thing you need to take away here is nitrate levels in the groundwater. And anything above a yellow is harmful for consumption. That's above 4 milligrams per liter. Something like 97% of the U.S. drinking water is well out of that range. However, this island here, completely reliant upon cesspools for wastewater disposal and reliant upon on-site wells. So you could imagine a well and a cesspool not being more than a couple of 100 feet away from each other, or less than 100 feet away from each other. And the image on the other side is if the plan put into place with existing technology that could reduce nitrogen pollution by 80% is in place, this is the future state we have here. We have long-term drinking water, and we have healthier bays and harbors supporting fisheries, tourism, home values, etc. So systems change is possible. We are here to support that system change in different localities. And I believe that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Chris. And just a very quick follow-up question to you. If you're talking about sewage, I think we can all relate to that being a very serious issue. At the same time, dealing with it from source to sea requires time, it requires investment, very significant investment. So how do you convince those living far from the sea that such investment is required, or that they might have to take a certain responsibility for something that causes a problem that they never actually see or feel?
Well, so they may feel it, they may see it, right? So that it's either impacting their drinking water, or maybe impacting other parts of their life that they just don't know yet, right? And education is a big part of this process to bring communities along. The more educated they are, the more likely they are to call for action and to be part and willingness to pay as part of that action. The other challenge here is in many communities, the resources provided at the coast in forms of tourism, second home values in many of these tourist type countries, the taxes on those reaped from those activities, the fisheries, the funds that they bring in help make the cost of living more affordable inland as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, our last panelist before we open it up a little bit more is Mark Weber of Deltares. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jacob. Oh, thank you, and an honor to have the finishing presentation here. Well, I'll be talking about a topic that maybe not a lot of you will be involved with most of the times. This is about tire and road wear particles. And I'll discuss a little bit more on what they are. But first of all, I should say that I'm presenting the work here, but the majority of the work has been done by a colleague of mine, so to Jos van Gils, all the credits go. I want to share with you a little bit about, well, what are tire and road wear particles? Well, they are formed between when you drive with your tires between the road and the tire, and they basically take in a little bit of incrustation of the road into the polymer. That ends up indeed on the pavement, and there you have your source. There are small particles being generated, which are, well, in the micrometers with low density. And they are being distributed by rainfall and runoff water towards the sea, towards the estuary. So we had a research question, and this work was not done only by us, but in collaboration with Kartner Gembrisk and for the European tire and road wear manufacturers, to investigate, well, where are those tire particles generated, and where do they end up, and how much do they end up there? Can we simulate indeed those concentrations in soils, sediments, or in water? And can we eventually then compile a mass balance so that you can see, well, where do you need to target mitigations, or what action do you need to take there? Well, this gives a picture of the first study. This is a picture of the concentrations, and there you see the Seine catchment area with Paris located in the middle. And well, we have high concentrations there, but it's still indeed a concern, and it's not certain yet, well, what does that actually mean? How damaging is that? What needs to be done after that? And then there was a second study, which was done together with the World Business for Sustainable Development and the tire industry project, together also with the university for Helmholtz, and also the apologies, the ERM. And there we tested basically 3 models set up for the Yodo-Biwa catchment, which is located in Japan, the Chesapeake Bay catchment, which is located in the USA, and another again for the Seine catchment to test this new developed model. And we looked into indeed where did it end up. Well, this has a linkage to multiple of the sustainable development goals, because in one hand you are talking about indeed where does it end up? Does it end up on land, or does it end up in water? Or how can we actually make sure that less of these particles end up somewhere? So can you do something about production, or something about how you develop your cities? And also, what is the concern then when it is in your water and you derive your drinking water from the same rivers? Will that be a concern? From these models we investigated, we found that indeed roadsides and runoff is variable, and that most of it actually gets stuck in the stormwater management system, and that's very dependent on the catchment that you look at. So, for example, you see removed from runoff for Yodo-Biwa, that's higher than Chesapeake Bay, but then again, the generation is also different from each other. And indeed, well, there's still uncertainty about how long does it stay into those sediments, how long does it stay in the soil. Degradation is still something that needs to be further investigated to see for certain, well, what is the go over time, how quickly does it appear from the location. Well, the results that we have so far is that we are successfully able to make those mass balances for these watersheds, and that it's a method that is globally applicable. So we could roll this out for any catchment anywhere. And that we also found that the main drivers are actually climate, so runoff in a way, how much rainfall will fall, how much particles, the particles are actually being carried to the estuary, and also the position of population centers relative to coastline. So if you're close to the coast, more is likely to end up in the estuary. Then again, also how much is captured in the urban stormwater management, and also how much is being generated, of course. And then you can also see that there's, well, as I mentioned, the climate has a huge impact on the effect of how much is being generated from the roadsides and how much that is distributed to the estuary. And if you look again at Yodo Biwa, the catchment in Japan, you see that there's a way higher runoff in comparison to Chesapeake and the Sena, for example. And of that, there's also way more particles eventually ending up in the estuary. So indeed, if you have a lot of flushing through, it's also more likely to be taken out to sea. Well, what can we do with these type of studies? Well, we can look at indeed at the generation part. Well, like how can we diminish the amount that is being generated? But also indeed, well, what are the focal areas? Where should we look for if we need to do some cleanup action or if we need to do measurements in the field? And also, what are targeted mitigations if you are investing in a bigger, a better stormwater management system? Can you then capture more particles and reduce the effect further down in the estuary? Yes, well, here are the contact details for me and my colleague. And as I mentioned, Jos van Gils has been heavily involved with these studies, especially the last one. And I want to thank you for your attention and refer to the publications that are out there if you would like to investigate further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. In fact, one quick follow-up also for you. You shared an example of how you've used modeling to understand an important issue. And so my question is, in this initiative, how do you ensure that the information you generate reaches the right audience in a right format so that it can inform some form of action?
It was mentioned before, communication is key here. And we do that partially, of course, for the scientific community through publication. And we have already seen a lot of citations on top of that work and a lot of expansion of those models. The scientific community is definitely going to a further detail to make sure that that everything is incorporated in those models. But partially also indeed just by working together with the partnerships that we work for. We work directly for the industry, so they also have directly access to that information and they can act on that information. But partially also just communication through indeed speaking at these kind of events to make sure that the work gets out there.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've now heard the full round of presentations from panelists. It's a variety of somewhat specific examples of where source-to-sea management approaches can be applied in addressing challenges. We'll try to stitch this together a little bit in a discussion. I'll ask a few more follow-up questions of the panelists in the meantime. Again, an encouragement to the audience to give some thought to whether you have questions you want to raise, and in a few minutes we'll have that opportunity for you. I think I'd like to focus the discussion now most importantly on moving towards more broad-scale action, accelerated action, upscaled action. So think about that. Maybe my first question will go to Hien, if I may, and perhaps after that to you, Andrea. Same question is, what are the challenges when you try to implement a source-to-sea management approach on the ground at the site level? Do you want to share a bit more of than you did in your presentation?
Well, Yes, we have I don't know, number of meetings, and then every meeting we need to repeat again, and kind of raising awareness people what is taught to see as is a new approach. It takes time for stakeholders, especially decision maker, to really understand this process and learn how to implement and adapt in the existing governance and institutional systems. And since 2016, the piloting sought to see approach in Nusa Tubun on water resource management. Stakeholders agree that water sea level approach to sought to see management give them a broader way to see the whole basins in discussion and decision making. This is the reason why the Joyce Committee team kept working and have biannual meetings. Some issue on cross boundaries and on administration system will impact to the sub-to-sea decisions and should be addressed through the open discussion, which is we need to have it right now, here and anywhere at different levels. However, we find that the fragmented governance impeded effort to address the heavy burden of the source. That is the reason why we are working to bring them up to sea management, from brick to brick and from step by step and slowly. And it's needed as our our opening remark is saying that it's complicated, but we need to approach that way. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Andrea, do you want to add something on that same question?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question because, and I want to go into something I didn't have time for in my presentation, but that's something we see often in case studies, not just in France. It's trust and the importance of interpersonal connections and the personality also of actors. That means if you get everyone around the table, but there are two people who hate each other on the same table, or they don't even hate each other, it's just they don't know each other, they've never worked together, or they don't really match, that can really ruin a project when it shouldn't, but you shouldn't overlook the personal factors. And so what you can do to sort of improve that is, first off, make those people know each other, so organize meetings and sort of maybe not starting to work on the project right away, but at least make an introduction, explain how you work, explain your time frame, your obstacles, and so you know how to work together. And another way you can do that when you don't have yet the institutions that allow you to work in an organized way from source to sea is making the connections and having a champion. So I really liked what you said about having champions that wake up every day and are like, I'm going to change something today, even just a little. Having a champion or an ambassador for your project, whether it's source to sea implementation or even NBS, that really changes things. And what we see often is young professionals are given those tasks of literally going to the village pub, of going to meet the practitioners that have never met each other and talking with them over a long period of time, sort of getting them on board, warming them up to the idea of doing things differently in an integrated manner. But the one problem we see with that is that often young professionals want to move on after a few years. They're not here to make their career in only one place. So it really has to be a long-term work and has to be understood that it's going to take time to warm people up to the idea.
So Andrea, you spoke here about interpersonal factors and the need to give that space because it's going to be needed. Can you draw a parallel to institutional factors there and bearing in mind that we have the institutional framework we have, if you don't change that, what can you as a practitioner do to foster the right environment to improve source to sea management?
Well, that's really linked. In the case studies we have, the institutions we're studying now, they weren't always there. Sometimes they are born out of a big crisis, such as in the case of Camargue, where lots of users don't get along well, and they need to find a common ground, find neutral space, and have rules for their interactions. Sometimes it comes from a sudden regulation being imposed on on the basin. And so you sort of had to scramble and fit into that regulation. And sometimes it's like the water is so important that we have to work together anyway. And then that's, for example, the case of this, the sedimentary management between Switzerland and France. It's really important for the downstream people to have sediments, and it's really important for the upstream people to not have too many sediments. So you have to find a way to manage that across river dams. So if you don't have yet the institutions, that's what you can do. You can bring people around the table, contact them, explain them the situation, because oftentimes practitioners, we only see what's in front of us and our problems. And we're so busy, we don't have time to listen into every meeting at the neighboring cities, for example. So if you bring everyone to the table, or even just talk to them individually ahead of the project, then you already sort of prepare them for eventually like making it official through an institution.
Fantastic. Chris, can I put you on the spot, and if you want to reflect a little bit on that same question, but in your sphere of work, you deal with sewage, you deal with sewage pollution, the water sector. Do you see a similar institutional dynamic, and can you reflect on that?
Yeah, institutional and cultural inertia and dynamics are challenging in that they were never set up to deal with the challenge that we're facing, right? So the institutions that might have oversight over how wastewater is managed probably don't have the same oversight over the environmental, and they don't talk to, those institutions don't talk to each other. And as you mentioned, you know, the health departments were often born out of some sort of crisis that happened a long time ago, and that institutional knowledge has carried through. And many times when it comes to sewage, the answer you get is, can't we just make it go away? We just want it to go away, right? So nobody wants to actually talk about it. Nobody wants to invest in it. And then when they realize that it's a generational challenge to fix a problem 2 generations in the making, and the cost associated with that, that's a major roadblock in itself, because no politician on a 2 or 4 year cycle is going to put his or her neck out there for something that's not going to be realized until his kids are old enough to run for office. So there's all these forces working together against that create this negative inertia that reinforces the status quo.
So we have systemic challenges, some of which you can overcome just by doing good work, by the right process, by the right investment. Some of it may actually long-term require a significant rethink in terms of institutions and jurisdictions as well, if I read it correctly. Yeah.
Or actually better collaboration across those institutions, instead of the sort of heavy-handed approach of tearing them down and recreating them.
And so you say collaboration here. I think a basis for collaboration may often be a common understanding. So Mark, again, going back to your example here, you shared data, you know, cold, emotionless modeling, but that can actually promote a common problem analysis and a common understanding. So can this type of modeling, have you applied it in other contexts?
Yeah.
Can you apply it in relation to plastic or to sewage or something else?
You can definitely apply it in relation to plastic, sewage, or nutrients, or water quantity aspects. And in my own experience with modeling, indeed, it seems very distant. It seems very procedural. Expert knowledge, people with expert knowledge not always seem to like it, because it takes away their expert knowledge in a way. But I find it a very useful tool to indeed have a look at the system and see, do we all have the same understanding? Do we have the complete grasp of the system? And can we actually capture it? Can we capture what is going on there? And can we validate that? Can we test it? And thereby also see, where is our knowledge still lacking, and where do we need to invest? And what are those best solutions to target this issue that we're facing, or what are the best ways to mitigate? So I think it's been very helpful in getting a better understanding of where to go and what to do.
Lynn, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm not going to ask you a specific follow-up question, but having heard the reflections here, is there anything you want to add on why we need a source-to-sea approach, or why we need to use this holistic and systemic approach?
Thank you, Jirka. And yes, to echo what all of the colleagues on the panel have said, it is about collaboration, and why we need this to make source-to-sea effective and to bring that awareness is to solve these bigger problems. I mean, every problem we have with every tiny environmental compartment is related to every other problem. And having just heard what Chris said about members of one ministry not talking to members of another ministry. This is very common in a lot of our work, and Xian and I have worked on multiple country projects and plastic pollution over the last few years, and we can tell you that part of the solution is to, when you're driving a new project or when you're looking at a new means of trying to solve something from a source-to-sea level, is to bring the right stakeholders together and give them that power of becoming a national committee or becoming a national action board, and bringing them together, like Andrea was saying, to talk to each other and to reinforce the messages and to bring the awareness to their groups and to spread that. We, I think as IUCN, one of our strengths is our convening power. We have, you know, so many member organizations that include national government members of different ministries. But even within that, we find sometimes that some of the ministries don't necessarily talk to each other. And I think, just to reiterate what everyone has said, the importance is communication and putting structures in place that allow for the source-to-sea messaging to sink in, really, and to understand that sewage comes from underground, not just from pipes in the ocean, and that the tires that are happening to, you know, wear down every time you drive somewhere, what that's doing to your local rivers and underground water. It's about educating and awareness building. So yeah, just reiterating what I think everyone has said, and it's been a really interesting discussion.
Thank you. Thanks then for that. And at this point, and I've promised you this already a couple of times, so I have to deliver. Do you have any questions that you want to put to our panelists here today? I look to people here in Stockholm as well as online. By all means, raise your hand, ask your questions, make your point. Would welcome that input. Okay, we see a hand over there. Please go ahead. Sorry, we can't quite hear you yet.
You have to click it on.
And once the mic is on,
I think
it
now
works
it's working.
very well.
Indeed.
Okay, please go ahead and introduce
So
yourself.
good
first if you can.
afternoon. My name is Claudette Spiteri, and I am at the IOC UNESCO in Paris, taking care of the JEF IW Learn project, which is the International Waters project. And as probably most of you know, both JEF and IW Learn, they work quite a lot on the source-to-sea paradigm, and it's a core element in our work. What I wanted to bring in is, I kind of noticed that we talk about source-to-sea in a rather unidirectional way, from source to sea. And if we really want to take this systemic approach that Hank started off in the beginning, I think we should also try to move a step further, like sea to source. I don't want to make it very complicated, but actually I would be interested in any success stories in which applying this paradigm that shows, for instance, that your upstream inputs have an impact downstream, actually led to any changes in the upstream policies, for instance, so that more in line with this integrated way to look at the management issues.
Thank you. So can I paraphrase and say you're asking for a diagnostic that is sea to source, so that the solution can be applied source to sea?
indeed closing the loop, right? If it's systemic, we need to close this loop. And so far, I think it's been very much
Let's put that to the panel. Thank you very much for that question. I see hands flying up, so I will give it first to you, Chris. Go ahead.
No, I think you have a wonderful question there, Claudette, and I think it's definitely necessary to look at it also from seed to source. And for a simple example in that regard is, for example, water quantity and how much is available for fish migration at certain parts of the years, and can those fish actually reach all the way up? But also in regards to water quality indeed, or sediment availability. Well, is that sediment indeed, is that enriching enough the estuary, and can that be used in a way to make those suitable habitats? So that's a very good question you have there. Yeah, in another regard, the pheromones, for example, that the eels use to migrate upstreams, are those coming downstream? Are those actually are they enough to lure those eels up? Is that enticing enough indeed to find their breeding habitats? So I think it's a very close linked relation, and we should definitely look at it at that perspective as well.
Fabulous. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, Claudette, great for raising this. Circular economies are a big passion of mine. A few years ago, as I came out of the marine world and into the watersheds and realized the scale of the challenge ahead, and the wasteful way in which we considered water, nutrients, and everything in the waste stream, I thought it would be great if we could remove the word waste from in front of water and begin to reclaim, because water's just, in many parts of this world, is just too precious of a resource to be considered a single-use product, right, as our nutrients, right? So if we could better institutionalize and encourage circular economy approaches where nutrients are reclaimed at wastewater or at reclamation facilities and brought back into the agricultural market, so we could stop importing petrochemical-based fertilizers or limit that, and get that water back out for at least one more round of use before it gets discarded or disposed, that would be great. It's possible, and there's biosolids programs that are gaining popularity, and as well as water reclamation and reuse facilities. Particularly, you see them very widely applied and used in water scarce parts of the world.
Thank you, Chris. I see their question has raised a lot of interest. So we have one question online, but I'm going to give a very short intervention to
Very
Andrea
short, because
first.
you stole my line about eels migration.
Oh, sorry.
But so I'll just take like flooding problems. If you don't manage the river well upstream, you will have problem downstream, and that's not even going back to the sea. And sediments is also a big thing. Camargue is not getting enough sediments because of dams along the river sort of impeding that transition. So every time you get to the sea, you have to look upstreams for whatever problems you have.
Thank you. So let's take the next question. We're going to have to speed up a little bit. Jose, please read it.
Thank you. So online from Xiamen University, we have one question. So they write, marine plastic is a cross-sectoral environmental issue that involves many of targets in the SDGs. So they ask whether it's more economical to have a specific regulatory framework to solve the marine plastic issue, or is it more effective to rely on separate policies in the different fields that it affects?
Ooh, and that's a very big question. Of course, we have eminently good experts on the panel to start answering those questions. I hand it over to you, Hien and Lynn. You may both want to weigh in here.
Well, I think there's not only solutions. I think it's a group of solutions. But at the moment, for the country like Vietnam, we start to work a lot on the extended producer responsibilities. So it will be very much on an economical rather than law and regulation. Law and regulation we can setting up, but then if we do not have enough capacity to implementing it, it's not going to work, and even worse. So that's why the Vietnam had passed the law on the environment and protection in 2020s, and in EPR, extended producer responsibility, will be in act start this year for the unrecycled material, and in 2024 for the recycled material, and all the businesses are really in hurry and working on that at the moment. So I think recycle is always one of the solutions, but it's not solve the issues. So we have to think that way rather than think that recycle could be solve the issue of the marine plastic pollutions, but reduce the production and reduce waste. That's the best. So that's my response. Maybe Lynn can have to add more, since you have a lot of experience in other countries.
Not as much as you do, Hien. I think you have tons of experience with this, especially on the ground. In terms of the issue of recycling, the wording we like to use related to plastic, and especially single-use plastics, is refuse, reduce, recycle, reuse, repurpose, redesign. There are lots of solutions, as Hien said, and they relate to things like legislative mechanisms like EPR, but also each country needs to identify the gaps in their policies. If you have a policy that is in place for years that as a law says you can't use recycled materials to package food, but you want to recycle packaging to package food, there's a conflict there. And the issues when you're addressing plastic pollution are to look at things from a knowledge standpoint as to what's actually happening, and a business standpoint, a circular economy standpoint, and a policy standpoint. So there are lots of solutions that are grouped in those four pillars, really, to tackle this issue. And recycling is certainly one of them, but there are lots of other ways to deal with marine plastic pollution to close the plastic tap. Thank you. Thanks, Hien.
Thank you, Lynn and Hien, and thanks for that very big question. But I think, yes, it's not an either-or answer. It is that we need both, but we need them to make sense together. And then it can actually achieve some result. We are very low on time, so I'm going to torture our panelists a little bit with a very rapid fire session before we close. I'm unilaterally deciding to run 5 minutes later. I hope you bear with me. 2 minutes late, I'm being told. Panelists, I have 3 questions. You may choose which you answer, but I'd like to have a one-sentence answer or two from each of you. First of all, what's the most critical need in accelerating adoption of source-to-sea approaches and really scaling up action? Or in the case you presented, what was the one thing that really made a difference? Or lastly, looking ahead now to the UN Water Conference, there's a preparatory meeting being held in October. What's the message you want to send to this preparatory meeting where they decide on the themes for the interactive dialogues in the conference? Choose your question, and one after the other. Please, I'm going to start with you, Andrea.
Yeah, I think I choose to look ahead, because going back to the fact that we need champions, right? There were talks at one point of having one of the conclusions of the UN 2023 conference being having a special water envoy that would make sure that fresh water is addressed in other big global events going forward. And I think that would be interesting to sort of, so that we don't forget that fresh water exists and has the same place and is as important as other issues such as the ocean, for example.
Political will, money, collaboration.
Very succinct.
I'm gonna add to the last one, indeed collaboration. We don't have the knowledge all together, or we don't have the knowledge by our own institute, but we do have it when we work all together. And you need to bring in partners to fill in the gaps that you have.
Right. Hien.
Sorry, this for me?
Yes, it's your turn.
Yeah. Well, I think the political will the case in Vietnam is very important. I mean, of course, we need finance, we need technologies, and we need knowledge and collaboration as well. Thank you.
Great, and you get the last word, Lynn.
I would say collaboration, resourcing, so funding, and knowledge-based and science-based policymaking.
Thank you so much. With that, Torkel, I've done you a disservice, but I think this is the absolutely right time to invite you back on stage for some closing remarks. On my behalf, I'd like to just say thanks for panelists for sharing something very concrete and from the ground and based on real-world experience. Let's see how we can put that together and really make something more of it. Torkel, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I was supposed to end the session and conclude, and I said, Jakob, why don't you continue? Because we've all heard it. And then you concluded for me with these 5 conclusions, which was great. But let me just say that I'm very encouraged about this thing. I mean, we start by Henk, who asked us to be provoking, to go out of the box, to, you know, and he stressed very much systems approach and all, going to New York. We have to really do something. And then we get these cases. And, you know, whoever designed it did a good job. I didn't do it, therefore I can say that. The platform was part of designing it, but we get these cases. We get IUCN to set the stage. We get the Rhone from you, and you also in our partners meeting said, help us. Let's share your experience and get some more experience into the Rhone. We got Vietnam with a fabulous case on plastic, right? We got you with the seen and unseen wastewater, and compelling cases on the seagrass and the mangroves and the coral reefs, right? And then, how often do we think about the tires when we think source to sea? I mean, every time we get some novel. But what is common to this is that the answers that are coming are common. I mean, you wanted everybody around the table. You said join the movement. I mean, and Yaka, you keep asking, what's the source to sea approach in this? You keep challenging people. What's the source to sea approach? You probably thought, I got him or got her, but you didn't. Because it was, in fact, what you all responded, the source to sea approach is a way of thinking. That's in fact what we said about RWM 10 years ago before it became a target. It's a way of thinking. Source to sea is sinking in, for sure. And your question, it's true. The good babies have many names. I mean, they're also called a ridge to reef, H2O, hilltop to ocean, and so forth. It's always that way, right? But when you look at the details, it is both ways. I mean, the sea level rise, what does that do? The saline intrusion, the fish migration, all of that. And even the hydrological cycle, when we start looking at, when we destroy the oceans, how do we in fact affect the whole cycle? And that's from ocean to source. So catchy names comes at a cost. And I'm glad you pointed it out, because source to sea is equally sea to source. So, but let me say what Henk said. I wrote it down to be sure. He said we should be vocal and active. We have from now until the 23rd of October, wasn't it? If we want this issue to have a high profile in New York. So, I mean, this is a nice session and so forth, but there's no room for complacency. From this, we have to generate a movement, you called it a movement, right, towards New York to get this high on the agenda. So I hope we can do that. On the way to New York, we have the COP, Climate COP in Egypt. We have the CBD COP in Canada. These are major global stepping stones that are really key to us. And we want Henk and Sultan to live up to their name, Tajikistan, Netherlands, Source to Sea Partnership. And I think this session was really helpful. I mean, this session showed that this is not just rhetoric. The cases were very real. And then that showed us that this issue is really, really very important. So I thank everybody for their contributions, excellent pitches. You kept your time. You answered his nasty questions. This was great. And then the question from the audience was very important. We will keep thinking about that. So thank you all for a great afternoon on Source to Sea. And now keep going on this so that in New York, nobody will doubt that the water action agenda is a Source to Sea agenda. So thank you very much, all of you.